Washington, D.C., late summer of 1942. Footsteps echo through the marble halls of the U.S. Treasury building, where stacks of silver bars gleam under locked vaults, each one stamped with the weight of a nation's currency. A lieutenant colonel in uniform, Kenneth Nichols, steps into a dimly lit office, his face set with the strain of a war that has already claimed too many lives. He slides a single sheet of paper across the desk to Under-Secretary Daniel Bell. A requisition for 14,700 tons of silver. Not for coins or jewelry, but to vanish into machines whose purpose no one outside a handful of rooms can know. The air hangs heavy with the scent of polished wood and ink, as Bell stares at the numbers, enough metal to fill train cars end to end, borrowed from the very reserves that back the dollar. Nichols knows the stakes. Without it, the Allies' desperate push against Hitler and the rising threat in the Pacific could falter in ways no battlefield can measure. Guards outside the door shift their weight, unaware that this quiet transaction will power a force capable of reshaping the world. And as the papers are signed, the first bars begin their journey south, loaded under cover of night, while across the ocean, enemy scientists chase the same invisible prize. This is the story of how America's Treasury silver formed the hidden backbone of the atomic bomb, and how thousands of young women in a fenced-off Tennessee town outdid elite scientists to separate the fuel that leveled Hiroshima. In 1942, the Allies teeter on the edge, Nazi Germany advances across Europe, Japan dominates the Pacific, and intelligence whispers that both powers race to unlock atomic power first, a weapon that could turn the tide or doom the free world. The Manhattan Project launches as the ultimate wager, a crash program to build the bomb before the enemy does, funneling billions into secrecy and science under General Leslie Groves. At its core lies a brutal challenge: from tons of ordinary uranium, extract just pounds of the rare isotope uranium-235, the only kind that can sustain the chain reaction to unleash unimaginable energy, and do it fast enough to win the war. The path forward demands a ghost city in the hills, wired with that borrowed silver to drive massive electromagnets, and an army of untrained operators trusted with dials that control the future. Uranium sits at the heart of it all, a heavy metal pulled from mines in Colorado and Utah, but not all uranium packs the punch needed for a bomb. Picture atoms as twins, nearly identical except for a tiny difference in weight. Uranium-238 makes up over 99%, stable but useless for fission, while uranium-235, the lighter one at just 0.7%, splits apart when hit by neutrons, releasing energy in a cascade that could power a city or vaporize one. That rarity turns every ton of ore into a needle in a haystack hunt. Scientists need hundreds of pounds of pure U-235 for a single device, but nature buries it deep in the common stuff, demanding methods to pry them apart on a scale no one has tried. Early efforts falter hard. Gaseous diffusion, where uranium gas pushes through barriers to let the lighter isotope slip ahead, promises scale but chews through power and materials like a factory on overdrive, with plants like K-25 at Oak Ridge still years from full output. Reactor work under Enrico Fermi aims to breed plutonium instead, but piles like Chicago Pile 1 barely hum at lab levels, too slow and risky for wartime deadlines, plagued by poison buildup and control rod failures that halt chains before they start. Centrifuges spin the gas to fling heavy atoms outward, but prototypes shatter under the corrosive uranium hexafluoride, their seals failing after minutes, while liquid thermal diffusion heats and cools columns to nudge separation. S-50's pilot plant yields only slight gains, feeding others but burning fuel without end. Electromagnetic separation steps up as the wild card, zap uranium into ions and curve them with magnets, the lighter path bending just enough to collect separately, proven in tiny cyclotrons but hungry for electricity and metal on an industrial level. But even if it works on a lab bench, scaling it would demand something the military literally did not have. Kenneth Nichols, a West Point engineer with a reputation for cutting through red tape, gets the order in early 1942, turn this atomic dream into hardware before the year ends, or watch the project collapse under its own weight. Fresh from overseeing dams and bridges, he clashes with the abstract world of physicists, his practical mind fixed on one want: to deliver the enriched uranium that generals demand. While fears of budget overruns and delays gnaw at him, especially with Groves breathing down his neck. Teamed with Ernest Lawrence, the Berkeley physicist whose 1939 Nobel for the cyclotron already bends particles like this, Nichols sees the path, adapt those tabletop machines into calutrons, giant versions where ions arc through vacuum arcs under magnetic pull. Lawrence's team sketches racetracks of them, each fed by coils that need copper. Tons upon tons for windings strong enough to yank isotopes apart at speed, but war has claimed every scrap for bullets, ships, and wires, leaving factories idle and orders stacking up. Nichols pores over maps of smelters choked by priorities, sketches deficits in ledgers showing artillery shells draining the last reserves, his pencil scratching numbers that climb into the impossible. Visuals cut to wartime posters urging metal drives, close-ups of molten copper pouring into molds for fuses, engineers at drafting tables circling bottlenecks in red ink. If he couldn't find a substitute, the bomb died before it left the drawing board. October 1942, the Treasury's executive suite feels worlds away from foxholes in North Africa or carriers in the Coral Sea. Nichols enters, cap under arm, facing Daniel Bell across a desk piled with coin mint reports and bond yields, the room's walls lined with portraits of Hamilton and Mellon. He lays out the ask, not pounds, but thousands of tons of silver, swapped for the vanished copper, to coil into electromagnets that will sort atoms invisible to the eye. Bell leans back, the contrast sharp. His clerks tally dimes for everyday Americans, now handed specs to melt bullion into wire like some back-alley forge, their routines appended by a war secret that risks the economy if word leaks. Nichols presses, voice steady, explaining the magnet's pull without spilling the bomb's name, while Bell weighs the vault's contents, 430 million troy ounces idle against a frontline crisis. Visuals linger on yellowed ledgers flipped open, fingers tracing columns of troy ounces under lamplight, Nichols' jaw tightening as the scale sinks in, a single bar hefted to show its cold weight. The deal they struck would quietly move over 430 million troy ounces of silver out of government vaults. By November, the first shipments roll out from West Point's depository north of New York, silver bars crated in wood and steel, guarded by Army details who eye civilians with suspicion as trains rumble south through Pennsylvania coal country. More follow from Philadelphia and Denver, the metal crossing rivers and mountains under blackout orders, destined for mills in Cleveland and Chicago where secrecy veils the orders as war materials. There, furnaces heat the bars to 1,800 degrees, hammers and rollers stretch them into sheets, then wires thick as ropes, wound layer by layer onto massive bobbins for the calutron hearts, conductors that will channel power to curve ion paths without melting under load. Engineers in overalls test coils for shorts, sparks flying in dim shops, while auditors track every ounce against Treasury ledgers flown in by courier. B-roll captures the grind. Rollers thundering as silver glows orange, coils stacking like giant springs, welders in masks fusing joints, sentries patrolling fenced yards at dusk. But this ocean of silver meant nothing without a place to plug it in, and that meant building an entire secret city from scratch. Tennessee's Appalachian ridges, once quiet farms and timber stands, erupt in February 1943 as bulldozers chew earth into red clay mud, crews pouring concrete for foundations that snake miles in oval loops. Rail lines spur in overnight, dumping steel and lumber, while barbed wire rings the site, codenamed Clinton Engineer Works, but whispered as dogpatch by workers barred from maps. The WWII plant rises first, 5 vast buildings shaped like horse racetracks, each a quarter-mile around, walls hiding 1,152 calutrons in concrete bays where silver coils will power vacuum chambers to whip uranium ions into semicircles, the U-235 veering left to collectors while U-238 arcs right. Power plants hum online, drawing juice from the Tennessee Valley Authority to feed the beasts. Hundreds of millions in 1940s dollars vanish into wages for 75,000 souls, from riveters to cooks, all sworn to silence under threat of jail, yielding just 140 pounds of enriched uranium after 2 grueling years of tweaks and tests. Montage rushes. Cranes swinging girders over fog-shrouded valleys, workers in hard hats hauling panels, floodlights piercing night as barracks fill with families chasing triple pay. And yet, the people who would actually run these machines had no idea what they were building. In a fenced-off valley in Tennessee, a bus shudders to a halt in the dark. The windows are fogged, the passengers tired, and the road behind them has already vanished into hills and checkpoints. The young woman in the third row clutches a canvas suitcase and a folded letter stamped with government ink. It says only that her work will help win the war, and that she is not to discuss it with anyone, not her parents, not her friends, not the girl sitting beside her on this bus. Outside, floodlights slice through the mist, picking out guard towers, barbed wire, and a gate where soldiers check names against lists that never appear in any local newspaper. Beyond that gate lies a town that did not exist a year ago, with streets that do not appear on any map, built for a project whose name she will not hear until after the war is over. They recruited her with a promise, not an explanation. Posters in small southern towns spoke of vital war work and good pay, but never said where, never said what. Army buses collected young women straight out of high school and factory floors, asking only that they be loyal, obedient, and willing to disappear for the duration. When she signed, she agreed to more than a job, she agreed to silence. No cameras. No letters that mentioned what she saw. No idle talk on streetcars or in mess halls. Every conversation might be overheard, every envelope opened by censors who worked as quietly as she soon would. As the bus rolls through the gate into Oak Ridge, she sees rows of hastily built barracks, steam rising from laundry sheds, and lines of workers waiting under warning signs, "Loose talk helps the enemy." Guards with rifles watch the crowd, not with open hostility, but with a steady, practiced scrutiny that tells her this place is serious in a way her old life never was. She is handed an ID badge with her photograph, a number, and the words, "Do not lose." That badge is now her name. Her roommates sleep in narrow metal beds in a crowded dormitory, the air thick with coal dust and boiler heat. No one knows exactly what the others do. The rule is simple: you ask no questions, and you answer none. Before her first shift, a supervisor pulls her aside and lays out the only guidance she will get: watch the dials. Keep the needles in the green. If you do your job right, this war ends sooner. When she steps into Building 9201 for the first time, the scale overwhelms her. The ceiling is lost in shadows and dust. The floor stretches out in long curves, lined with metal boxes the size of refrigerators on both sides, forming an oval racetrack that seems to run on forever. Thick cables, made from the Treasury's silver, snake overhead into each machine. The noise is a constant mechanical hum: vacuum pumps, cooling fans, power transformers, punctuated by the occasional crackle of an electrical arc somewhere down the line. No one gives her a lecture on atomic physics. Instead, she is shown a simple control panel, a few gauges, some switches, and two needles that twitch and drift across narrow scales. Somewhere inside the steel and concrete, uranium tetrachloride is heated until it becomes a vapor, its atoms stripped of electrons and whipped into an arc by high voltage. Those charged particles fly through a magnetic field created by the silver coils, curving according to their mass. Lighter uranium, 235, bending slightly more than the heavier uranium, 238, each striking separate collectors hidden from her view. To her, it is all reduced to this: if the beam is strong and stable, the needles settle where they should. If it falters, the needles wander, and she must bring them back. She sits on a bare metal stool, one of dozens of young women in a long row, each staring at their panel, hands hovering over knobs that fine-tune voltages and fields. Their instructions are precise yet narrow: watch the gauges, log the readings, respond instantly to any drift. A scientist once tried to teach them the theory, but production dropped. The women worked better when they focused on patterns rather than equations. Lawrence and his physicists, confident in their understanding, tried their own hands at running the machines. And then watched as the untrained operators, known around town as Calutron girls, consistently achieved higher output and steadier beams. Shift after shift, They outperformed the experts by treating the gauges like a living heartbeat, learning the rhythm by instinct. On screen, numbers appear: 1,152 calutrons in the WWII plant. A town that has swelled to around 75,000 people. All of this effort, this power, this silver, slowly climbing toward a total yield of about 140 pounds of highly enriched uranium, enough for a single bomb and then some, after nearly 2 years of relentless operation. Life inside the racetracks is never steady for long. Power surges ripple through the system when the grid strains under wartime demand, making the needles jump and the beams stutter. Equipment overheats, coils short out. Arcing scars the interior of tanks that must be taken offline and cleaned at great cost. Technicians crawl into cramped service bays to scrape deposits from collectors and wipe away contamination, always careful to avoid damaging the precious silver windings that make the entire process possible. Every shutdown feels like a personal failure to the operators watching their dials go dark. Outside the control rooms, shortages bite in quieter ways. Cafeterias run low on meat. Shoes are rationed. Extra blankets disappear from barracks as winter settles over the muddy hills. Meanwhile, secrecy tightens. Workers are called into small offices and asked about their conversations, their friends, even their offhand remarks in the cafeteria. Mail arrives with telltale slits where censors have opened and resealed envelopes. Rumors fill the gaps, some say they are making synthetic rubber. Others whisper about poison gas, or fuel for a new kind of airplane engine. One afternoon, a small incident spreads through the plant like a ghost story. A worker, tempted by the shine of a discarded scrap of metal from a machine, tucks it into a pocket as a souvenir. At the gate, scales and records catch the discrepancy. Security officers pull the worker aside, the fragment laid on a table under a bright lamp. Calm but unyielding, they explain that every gram of that silver is tracked from the Treasury vault to the plant floor and back again. Nothing leaves without a record, nothing is extra. The worker loses the job, and the story travels further than any official bulletin. If you touch what is not yours here, the system will notice. Back in the control room, the young woman settles onto her stool, eyes on the needles. Somewhere far to the west, bomber crews train over the Pacific, unaware that their future payload is still only a faint trace on her dials. By mid-1945, the invisible stream of enriched uranium accumulating in guarded containers has finally reached a critical milestone. The material from WWII, painstakingly separated atom by atom, is shipped under armed escort, transferred into a core that will be assembled thousands of miles away. Engineers and ordnance teams on Tinian Island in the Pacific take delivery of metal that, to them, is simply the product, its true origin layered under classification stamps and code words. Blueprint-style diagrams show the bomb they call Little Boy, a gun-type device that rams one subcritical mass of uranium-235 into another to create a single, supercritical core in a fraction of a second. Ground crews film test assemblies, practicing the careful loading of the long, olive-drab casing into the bomb bay of the B-29 that will carry it, the Enola Gay. As they drill in the blinding tropical sun, the Calutron girls at Oak Ridge continue their shifts in fluorescent-lit rooms, eyes fixed on needles, unaware that some of the atoms they have coaxed from the common metal have already left the continent. For them, the war is still a distant roar on the radio, the front lines a concept rather than a place. No one tells them that the thing they have helped to build now has a target. At 8:15 in the morning, Hiroshima is an ordinary city in motion. Bicycles rattling over bridges, children walking to school, office clerks unlocking doors. Then, in less than a second, the sky turns white. From a high altitude come a flash, a shockwave, and a rising column that will be remembered in photographs and in nightmares. The uranium-235 separated at Oak Ridge fuses into a single chain reaction, releasing energy equivalent to tens of thousands of tons of TNT. Back in Tennessee, word reaches Oak Ridge with the same abruptness. Loudspeakers call workers out of buildings and into open spaces. Supervisors, some trembling, read from prepared statements explaining, for the first time, what the plant has been doing, producing material for an atomic bomb that has just destroyed a Japanese city. For many, the initial reaction is pride and relief. The war that has consumed their brothers and husbands may finally end. Others stand silent, struggling to connect the quiet vigilance of their daily work with the flattened streets and burned faces now described in sparse official language. The young woman from the bus listens as someone says, "Your hands on those dials helped make this happen." Some feel they have helped save countless lives by bringing the conflict to a quicker close. Others carry a different weight, a question that will follow them long after the sirens of war fall silent. As the announcement ends, one more question lingers unspoken. The bomb's uranium came from coils of Treasury silver. What happens to all that metal now? With victory in sight, attention turns to the physical remnants of the project. The Treasury wants its silver back. The Army has promised to return every possible ounce. What follows is a cleanup operation as painstaking as the original construction. Crews in protective clothing dismantle calutrons piece by piece, cutting power lines, unbolting magnets, and hauling equipment out of the racetracks. Floors are scraped by hand to remove dust and microscopic particles that might cling to surfaces, every bucket of debris weighed and processed. Specialized refiners melt down used coils and bus bars, skimming off contaminants to reclaim metal that has spent years humming with current inside the heart of an atomic plant. Workers vacuum machinery, sweep rafters, and even launder overalls in controlled facilities, catching stray filings and shavings in filters for recovery. Shipment after shipment rolls back toward Treasury vaults, silver recast into ingots nearly indistinguishable from those that left years earlier. In a twist that seems almost impossible, the total weight tallied on the books slightly exceeds the original loan. By refining scrap and residues along the way, the project returns more silver than it borrowed, as if the process had reached back through industrial history to reclaim old losses. The bars are stacked once again in quiet vaults, their surfaces giving no hint that they were once the core of a secret factory that helped unlock the power of the atom. As the calutrons fall silent and the last trains of silver depart Oak Ridge, the world steps into a new era. The WWII silver program stands as one of the clearest symbols of the Manhattan Project's reach, a nation willing to convert its monetary reserves into machinery, build entire cities in a matter of months, and swear tens of thousands of people to secrecy in pursuit of a single weapon. In the years that follow, other methods of enrichment, gaseous diffusion, gas centrifuges, take over the job of producing nuclear fuel, faster and cheaper than the lumbering calutrons. The big electromagnetic machines that once strained at Oak Ridge are gradually shut down, some repurposed for research and medical isotope production before being eclipsed entirely by newer technology. Yet their legacy remains. Every debate about nuclear deterrence, every power plant fueled by enriched uranium, traces a line back to those first hard-won grams pulled from ordinary or by silver-fed magnets. The story of the Calutron girls and the Treasury silver forces a question that cannot be answered with ledgers or blueprints alone. Was it worth turning a nation's wealth into coils and cables to create a bomb that destroyed a city? Some argue that, by hastening Japan's surrender, the atomic attack spared far greater casualties than an invasion might have brought. Others see a line crossed that can never be uncrossed, a moment when human ingenuity proved its capacity to end cities in a flash. And then there is the personal question, harder still, if you had been in Kenneth Nichols' position, or in the chair of a young operator in Oak Ridge. Knowing only fragments of the plan, warned that silence and obedience might end the war sooner, would you have made the same choice? The silver is back in the vaults now, stacked and silent. But the world it helped create is still very much alive, and the decisions made in those guarded rooms continue to echo far beyond the hills of Tennessee.